Here's how to do some hand stitches. Running stitch. Bring the needle from the back to the front and have a knot in the end of your thread, and then all you do is push the needle in, bring it out, in and out, pull the needle through, and that's how you do running stitch. End up with the needle at the back, and you'd tie off at the back to finish it. Back stitch. Bring the needle from the back to the front again and start as if you were doing running stitch, but then instead of carrying on, go back to the end of the last stitch and then come out beyond where you ended off before, like that. Pull the needle through, don't pull up your thread too tightly, otherwise your fabric will bunch up, which in this case we don't want. And that's what you do, come out beyond where you ended previously and keep going back. Back stitch is good if you ever need to simulate machine stitching by hand for whatever reason, but obviously it's likely that you would do that on a much smaller scale than this sample. So when you've done your back stitches, you just make sure you end up on the back. Cross stitch. We make a series of diagonal lines first, and they go wherever you want the crosses to be. Something like that. And then you change direction and do a series of diagonal lines coming back again, making your crosses. Sometimes the fabric you use might make it easier to make your crosses more accurate than these ones. But again, like with all your samples, end up with the last stitch bringing the thread to the back of your sample or your work, and while we have crosses on that side, we should just have parallel lines on the other side. Chain stitch. Chain stitch, you just put the needle in where you have come out from, go along a bit, and before you pull the needle out, wrap your thread around the point of the needle and then pull the needle through, and pull the thread through in the direction that your chain is going to go, like that. Don't pull it backwards. If you pull it backwards, you'll lose that stitch. It will end up doing something like that. So making sure that your links in your chain are in the right direction, you just carry on repeating the process. Put the needle in where you came out, go along a bit, wrap the thread around the point of the needle and pull the needle through. And again. Put the needle in, go along a bit, wrap the thread around the point of the needle and pull the needle through. And do your line or swirls or whatever you want to do in chain stitch, and when you've finished, we'll imagine this is the last stitch in our work, make sure to end off you take this thread over the edge of the last link. It's important you do that. If you don't, all your stitches will unravel. So you do that on the last stitch and end off at the back. This is chain stitch used to make a daisy, and you make a stitch, like the last stitch in a whole line of chain stitch, because each petal of the daisy has to be pegged out or pinned down. So This is just the last stitch of this flower to show you as a sample. Take the thread to the back as always, and then ending off at the back you do the same for all of these samples. Just find a stitch to loop through and sew through. And then cut the end off. Blanket stitch. Bring the needle from the back to the front and then go along a bit, putting the needle through from the front to the back, and then take your thread, wrap it round the point of the needle that just comes up from the top edge of your cloth. This is blanket stitch on the edge of your material. I'll show you another way of doing blanket stitch in a moment. And so we just repeat that process, hooking round the thread, hooking round the needle each time you make a stitch. From right to left if you're right-handed, sewing from right to left. If you're left-handed, you'll sew from left to right when you do this. So that's blanket stitch. And then blanket stitch on the surface of fabric as opposed to on the edge of it. So again, just go in and up, but out this time. And then repeat the process. Just shaping your stitches as you go. A bit like chain stitch, if you pull the thread in the wrong direction you'll distort the stitch. So just think each time you pull the thread through. And if you do this on a smaller scale, it's good for making hand-worked buttonholes. French knots. Just take your thread and twist it round your needle 2 or 3 times. We'll do this one just twice, and then push the needle in where you came out. Pull the thread through, and you make a knot that sits on the surface of your fabric. So we'll do that again. Pull the needle through from the back to the front. This time I'll wrap the thread around 3 times, and then carefully pull that back, trying not to lose all those twists off the point as you then push through your material. Pull it through. French knots. So there we are, some decorative and functional stitches to try.